A queen declared that whoever could slay her colossal beast would win her hand. Hundreds of warriors failed, but no one expected an ordinary human to turn luck and cleverness into the impossible. The sky above Urindor shimmered with streaks of violet and green, the kind of colors that made even the most seasoned travelers pause mid-flight to wonder if their eyes were betraying them. From the palace terraces, one could see the spires of crystal and metal twisting toward the heavens like the fingers of some celestial hand, catching the light of the twin suns in glimmers that could blind a careless observer. Queen Althira leaned against the polished railing, her long ears angled backward in amusement, as she watched the latest holoscreen transmission of a would-be champion crash spectacularly into the jungle below. The man had been boasting about his experience with hyperkinetic plasma lances, before tripping over a vine that seemed to have its own malicious intent, launching him headfirst into a puddle of glowing slime. Althira's laughter rang through the chamber, musical and sharp, a sound that made the court's attendants duck reflexively even as they tried to appear composed. "Do they even read the challenge rules?" she asked aloud, not expecting an answer, though a cluster of hovering drones whirred nearby as if to nod in solemn agreement. "I said slay the beast, not perform slapstick routines in my jungle." She pressed her fingers against her chin, considering. The galactic map in her mind cataloged the hundreds of warriors en route, hulking ex-military types, smug bounty hunters, and a contingent of alien royals whose egos could have powered their planets for a decade. Yet none had so far come close to even scratching the surface of her colossal beast, a creature whose scales shimmered like liquid metal, and whose roar had been known to crack moons. Meanwhile, on a much less glamorous world, Calvin was staring at a flickering holoscreen in a cramped apartment that smelled faintly of fried noodles and burnt circuits. He'd been scrolling for hours, avoiding his own responsibilities, when the announcement flashed across the screen. Queen Althira's challenge: slay the colossal beast and win her hand. Calvin squinted at the image of a giant, scaly monster that looked suspiciously like something out of a hologame he had once failed miserably to beat. He leaned back in his squeaky chair, spilling a bit of instant soup down the front of his shirt. "Well," he muttered, "that seems statistically impossible, but hey, maybe they'll have snacks." As improbable as it seemed, Calvin decided to enter. His reasoning was impeccable in its own peculiar way. He had a vivid imagination, an unexpected knack for improvisation, and absolutely nothing to lose. He packed what he considered essential supplies: a half-broken multi-tool, 3 packs of dehydrated noodles, and a cap that had belonged to his father, which he declared would bring him cosmic luck. The cap did nothing of the sort, but it made him feel slightly more heroic, which he decided was half the battle anyway. Calvin's journey to Urindor was a series of absurd misadventures. He managed to steal a shuttle that looked as if it had been cobbled together from spare parts, using the universal excuse of emergency noodle delivery at the bureaucratic checkpoint, which the bored alien officers accepted after 5 minutes of suspiciously loud sighing. Once airborne, he discovered that the ship's autopilot had a sense of humor, randomly diving and rolling while Pip, his tiny AI companion, emitted sarcastic commentary at a frequency that threatened his sanity. "Really, Calvin," Pip said, hovering next to his head like a miniature judge, "you consider this piloting?" Calvin ducked as the shuttle narrowly missed a meteor the size of a small moon. "Hey, I'm improvising," he shouted. "It's called artistic navigation." Pip buzzed in disbelief, noting that if artistic meant certain death, Calvin was a true virtuoso. Meanwhile, back on Urindor, Althira observed from her crystal throne how the galaxy's finest warriors fared, or rather failed. One ex-general had tried to ride a hover dragon into battle, only to discover that the beast had a sudden preference for perching on top of nearby mountains while shaking its massive wings in judgment. Another warrior, armed with a plasma hammer that could theoretically split planets in two, misfired and flattened the entry gates to the beast's lair, forcing the guards to rebuild them with extreme haste, while Althira pinched the bridge of her nose and laughed. "Honestly," she muttered, "this is turning out better than I expected." Calvin arrived at the outskirts of the jungle without fanfare, tripping over his own feet twice before taking cover behind a rock that was suspiciously too small to hide anything. The colossal beast's roar echoed in the distance, sending vibrations through the ground that made Calvin's teeth chatter. He peeked out, expecting to see the end of his life, and instead saw something almost comical. The beast was examining a flock of glowing birds, seemingly distracted by their incessant chirping. Calvin blinked, then whispered to Pip, "Maybe it's a little gullible." Pip's sensors confirmed. The creature's attention span was short, particularly when faced with something shiny or melodious. This observation sparked an idea, and Calvin's improvised heroics began. He rigged a series of mirrors to reflect the sun's rays, bouncing them into the beast's eyes while simultaneously dangling a cache of glowing alien fruit to lure it toward a canyon. Every step of the way, Calvin muttered self-encouraging nonsense. "Okay, if I survive this, I deserve a medal or at least a lifetime supply of noodles." Pip groaned audibly. "Your confidence is only matched by your obliviousness, human." Yet each misstep seemed to work in his favor. The beast stumbled, tilted its head, and eventually plodded right into the canyon, tangled in the traps Calvin had improvised using vines, rocks, and what he described as some kind of cosmic duct tape I found lying around. Word of the human's success reached Queen Althira in real time, causing her to nearly spill her tea. She had expected some unusual strategies from alien warriors, but a human, on this planet, with minimal equipment and a talent for clumsily genius thinking. Her laughter began as incredulity, then rolled into delight, echoing through the halls of her palace. She leaned forward, her long ears twitching with curiosity. "Perhaps," she mused, "this one will be more entertaining than I anticipated." Calvin emerged from the jungle, exhausted, filthy, and somehow holding the beast's shimmering claw aloft in victory. He tripped again, naturally, but Pip, who had grown uncharacteristically fond of the human, managed to stabilize him mid-fall. The other warriors stared, mouths agape, unable to comprehend how a regular human had pulled off what seemed impossible. Calvin waved sheepishly. "Hi," he said, "I guess I'm the winner." Pip muttered, "Congratulations, genius. You have officially broken every known law of heroics and common sense." Calvin grinned. "I like to think of it as innovation." Back in her throne room, Althira prepared for his arrival. She polished the ceremonial handoff gloves, adjusted her crown slightly to account for her ears, and instructed the court to be ready, but also to be amused. "Let us see how this human handles the court," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of judgment and anticipation. The galaxy had been waiting for a spectacle, and it seemed that the most unlikely champion had arrived, already rewriting the rules of power with a combination of wit, luck, and a peculiar kind of chaotic charm. As the suns of Urindor dipped toward the horizon, casting long violet shadows across the palace, Calvin made his way toward the throne, Pip buzzing nervously by his side. The palace guards were tense, the alien nobles intrigued, and Queen Althira's gaze was sharper than the edge of a plasma blade. Calvin, however, walked with a strange mixture of trepidation and awe, muttering under his breath about whether anyone had noodles here. Pip groaned again. "Yes, let's hope the court has instant noodles. That's your plan for diplomacy, isn't it?" Calvin shrugged. "Hey, it worked for the shuttle." And so, with the galaxy holding its breath, the ordinary human approached the alien queen, the colossal beast's shadow stretching behind him, and a trail of cosmic improbabilities following in his wake. The stage was set for a story where cleverness, humor, and sheer human audacity might just overturn centuries of alien hierarchy, and perhaps teach an entire court the value of a well-placed joke. Calvin had barely stepped into the vast throne hall when he realized that the sheer scale of the place could easily swallow a dozen humans without them noticing. The floor shimmered like liquid metal, reflecting the twin suns of Urindor in patterns that made it seem as though the ground itself was alive. Columns of crystal rose from the floor, twisting like helixes into the high ceiling, where bioluminescent vines pulsed gently, shedding light that seemed both natural and engineered. The air hummed faintly, carrying the scent of ozone and something sweet, almost like caramelized fruit, though Calvin had no idea how it reached this height in the palace. He stumbled once as the reflective floor had confused his depth perception, and Pip whizzed beside him, muttering, "I said you were spatially challenged. Did you hear me?" "No, shocking." Calvin waved a dismissive hand. "I'm fine. Totally fine, just recalibrating my internal balance system." The court of alien nobles regarded him with a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and what Calvin assumed might be mild amusement. Their long ears twitched in rhythm with their measured breathing, and their eyes glowed faintly under the palace light. They were dressed in fabrics that seemed woven from starlight itself, flowing around them as if gravity were merely a suggestion. Every gesture was deliberate, every movement a study in alien elegance. Calvin, on the other hand, looked like he had rolled in mud, tripped over a canyon, and survived only because cosmic luck had taken pity on him. He waved awkwardly, muttering, "Hi, everyone, I guess." Pip buzzed exasperatedly, "Congratulations, human. You're officially the most underdressed hero in galactic history." Queen Althira observed him from her throne, the long sweep of her silver hair framing a face that was both formidable and mesmerizing. Her ears angled forward slightly, an unspoken signal of her intrigue. She had expected her suitors to arrive with polished armor, glinting weapons, and inflated egos. What she did not anticipate was a human whose greatest weapon seemed to be improvisation and sheer luck. Calvin's presence was like a chaotic ripple through centuries of tradition, and Althira found herself leaning forward, smiling in a way that was entirely unqueenly. "Welcome," she said, her voice smooth, commanding, yet playful. "I trust the beast treated you with adequate respect." Calvin coughed nervously. It was, a learning experience. Very educational, definitely terrifying, but educational. Pip added sotto voce, educational. More like catastrophic luck disguised as competence. Calvin ignored him, focusing instead on not tripping over the edges of the floor, which seemed to ripple slightly with every step. The first official audience with the Queen was unconventional. Protocol dictated that he kneel, but Calvin's knee clicked oddly on the metallic floor, and he nearly face-planted. Althira raised an eyebrow, a gesture that conveyed equal parts amusement and curiosity. "Perhaps," she said, "we can adjust the ceremony to account for your unique posture." Calvin scrambled upright, muttering, "I can assure you, Your Majesty, I am fully capable of, well, mostly capable of following royal customs, sort of." Pip, not missing a beat, whispered, "Sort of. Really, Calvin. We are in the presence of alien royalty. Sort of is not a strategy." Over the next few days, Calvin navigated the palace with a series of mishaps that somehow worked in his favor. He mistook a levitating orb of security drones for a decorative light, only to discover they were scanning for intruders. He inadvertently set off a chain reaction of holographic projections, confusing the court's most prestigious advisor, who spent nearly an hour attempting to locate a missing dimensional anomaly that had, in reality, been Calvin's bootprint. He even accidentally ordered a banquet of glowing, singing desserts that terrified the palace chef, though the Queen found the spectacle hilarious. "You seem to have a gift," she noted, watching Calvin chase a floating creme brulee with his bare hands. A gift for chaos. As amusing as these incidents were, Calvin's true genius began to reveal itself when he addressed the political and practical aftermath of defeating the colossal beast. The creature's lair was not merely a jungle, but a complex ecosystem of alien flora, many of which were dangerously territorial. Calvin, rather than attempting to remove or destroy these plants, cleverly mapped their habits and interactions, using humor and observation to predict their movements and avoid conflict. Pip commented dryly, "I never imagined you study alien botany with such reckless optimism." Calvin grinned. "Hey, it worked for the beast. Why not the plants?" The Queen watched all of this with fascination. Here was a human who lacked formal training, brute strength, or elegant martial skill, yet whose combination of intuition, humor, and improvisation had achieved what entire armies could not. During their conversations, Calvin cracked jokes, some landing, some failing spectacularly. But even the failures revealed a kind of courage that Althira admired. He asked innocent, naive questions about palace customs, which often exposed inconsistencies or outdated protocols, causing the Queen to laugh in ways she had long forgotten were possible. For the first time in decades, her court seemed unpredictable, alive, and amusing. Calvin's interactions with other challengers provided further levity. Warriors from across the galaxy, who had arrived expecting glory and perhaps the Queen's hand, found themselves both irritated and bemused by his unorthodox methods. One warrior, a hulking reptilian mercenary, attempted to intimidate Calvin by flexing his four arms simultaneously. Calvin responded by juggling a set of glowing orbs he found on a pedestal, winning the Queen's laughter and leaving the mercenary scowling. Another contender, a suave humanoid with a reputation for charm, tried to engage Calvin in a debate over proper dueling etiquette. Calvin, thinking quickly, proposed a contest of knock-knock jokes instead, which the Queen judged with glee, ultimately awarding Calvin victory in her eyes once more. Amidst the humor, Calvin also discovered small, subtle mysteries of Erendor that no other human, or alien, had noticed. Secret corridors behind holographic walls, unusual gravity fields that allowed brief flight when timed correctly, and plants that reacted to sound in curious ways all became tools in his unconventional approach to palace life. Pip often sighed, noting that Calvin's lucky blunders seemed to reveal patterns that highly trained analysts had missed. Calvin shrugged. "I prefer to call it exploratory comedy." Eventually, the Queen arranged for a formal parade of the victor. Calvin, still awkwardly clad in his rumpled human clothes, rode atop a hovering platform with the court's ceremonial banners floating around him. The crowd of alien nobles stared, mouths agape, unsure whether to be scandalized or entertained. Calvin waved awkwardly, tripped over a banner cord, and somehow managed to slide across the platform, arms flailing, without falling into the chasm below. Althira clapped, her long ears flicking in approval. "Truly remarkable," she said, "and yet entirely ridiculous. You human embody both chaos and competence." By the end of the chapter, Calvin had begun to carve out a place in the court not through power or tradition, but through ingenuity, humor, and an unpredictable way of thinking that challenged centuries of alien hierarchy. He had made allies, enemies, and an impression on the Queen that would shape the decisions of the entire planet. The palace was alive with anticipation, not just for what Calvin might do next, but for the ripple effects his presence would have across Erendor and the galaxy. As the twin suns set, casting shifting colors over the crystalline halls, Calvin slumped in a chair too grand for him, Pip hovering beside him, muttering complaints about alien etiquette. Calvin sighed. "Well, Pip, we survived day one. I think tomorrow we get to rewrite the entire rulebook." Pip's tone was skeptical, but there was an unmistakable undertone of reluctant admiration. "If by rewrite you mean break every known law of logic and decorum, then yes. Congratulations, human, you are extraordinary." Calvin smiled, watching the sun's light refract through the palace, turning the world into a kaleidoscope of color and possibility. "Extraordinary, that's a nice word," he said. "I could get used to this." Calvin awoke to the soft hum of the palace's bioluminescent lights, the colors shifting gently across the walls in a pattern that seemed almost alive. He stretched, accidentally smacking his head on the edge of the floating canopy bed, and muttered, "Okay, maybe I'm not used to alien ergonomics yet." Pip buzzed nearby, a tiny exclamation mark of digital annoyance. "Not used to alien ergonomics. You've been surviving a death beast, dodging palace protocols, and managing to charm the queen herself. I'd say alien ergonomics is the least of your worries." Calvin rubbed his head. "Yeah, but at least this one is predictable. Beds don't eat you usually." Breakfast in the palace was an affair Calvin never could have anticipated. Dishes hovered gently in the air, presenting themselves one by one, singing tiny operatic notes in a high-pitched alien language. He reached for a floating fruit, only to have it dart upward, narrowly avoiding his grasp. Pip sighed. "I told you, human, the palace kitchen has a sense of humor. You might survive the jungle, but can you survive breakfast?" Calvin laughed, catching the fruit midair. "I'll survive anything, Pip. I've got reflexes, sort of." After breakfast, Calvin was summoned to the council chambers. The room was a spiraling helix of platforms, each level populated by alien dignitaries who eyed him with varying degrees of suspicion and amusement. He noticed that many of them were still muttering about the ridiculous human who actually beat the beast. Some whispered that perhaps he had cheated, though Calvin's chaotic journey had left no room for deception. It was all luck, intuition, and a touch of absurdity. Queen Althira sat at the top of the chamber, her long ears angled forward as she studied him. "Today," she said, her voice carrying both authority and amusement, "we will discuss what comes next. Calvin, you have disrupted our expectations, and it is refreshing." Calvin scratched the back of his head. "I hope that's a good kind of refreshing and not the oops, this human is a disaster kind." Althira tilted her head, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "A little of both, but mostly the first. You've shown ingenuity, courage, and an unexpected sense of humor. That last part is dangerous, as it seems to undermine decorum, but I rather like it." The council debated fiercely over the implications of Calvin's victory. Some nobles were outraged, insisting that no human, let alone one so unconventional, should hold influence over Erendor. Others were intrigued, pointing out that his strategies, although bizarre, had saved countless lives and resources. Calvin listened politely, occasionally making offhand jokes about gravity fields in the hall or the oddity of floating chairs, which had the effect of breaking tension and softening opinions. Pip whispered, "Your humor might just save your life here, human." Calvin shrugged. "And if not, at least I'll go down laughing." One of the most pressing issues was the colossal beast itself. Though Calvin had subdued it, the creature's ecosystem had been disrupted, leaving dangerous gaps in the jungle's balance. Instead of commanding soldiers to restore order, Calvin proposed an unconventional plan. He would work with the creature, turning its habits into a system that would benefit the planet. The nobles stared, some in horror, others in fascination. Calvin explained that the beast had predictable patterns and a fondness for shiny objects, which could be used to manage the other dangerous fauna of the jungle. He demonstrated using small holographic models and a handful of levitating fruit. Althira's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You propose negotiation with the beast?" Calvin grinned. "Well, negotiation, bribery, and a little creative persuasion. Works on humans, works on monsters." Over the next several days, Calvin implemented his plan, often accompanied by humorous mishaps that somehow enhanced his credibility. He accidentally tripped over a vine trap, startling the beast into repositioning itself perfectly for a feeding cycle that kept the ecosystem balanced. He misfired a small energy tether, which created a spectacular light show that the local fauna mistook for natural signaling, reducing conflicts among rival species. Pip sighed audibly. "Your lucky chaos is your ally, human." Calvin winked. "Luck is just preparation meeting opportunity and a sprinkle of clumsiness." The palace began to shift under Calvin's influence. Rules were reconsidered, protocols softened, and the rigid hierarchy that had governed the court for centuries began to show cracks. Yet Calvin's approach was not one of domination, but of cooperation. He engaged the nobles in small, absurd challenges that revealed their hidden strengths and weaknesses, using humor as both a tool and a weapon. A game of floating puzzle orbs led to the discovery of a previously unknown energy source within the palace. Another contest, involving levitating cups and zero-gravity balancing, highlighted talents in diplomacy and strategy among unlikely candidates. Althira watched, fascinated, as the humans' unorthodox methods reshaped the court without directly confronting it. Amid these developments, the bond between Calvin and the Queen grew. They spent long hours discussing the peculiarities of human and alien psychology, sharing jokes that often required Pip to intervene with sarcastic commentary. One afternoon, Calvin accidentally flung a floating teacup across the chamber, narrowly missing the Queen's ceremonial robe. He froze. Althira laughed, her long ears twitching. "You are predictably unpredictable, human. I rather enjoy it. Perhaps it is time we consider what your role in my court truly is." Calvin swallowed. I don't know what I deserve, but I'd like to help, I guess, in any way I can." Althira's smile softened. "Then you shall. Not as a subject, not as a soldier, but as a partner in thought and action. You have proven that the galaxy does not run on strength alone, but on creativity, courage, and humor." With that, the palace and surrounding territories began to adjust to a new era. Calvin's influence spread beyond the court, as his innovative approaches to resource management, diplomacy, and ecosystem stabilization began to reshape Erendor. The once rigid hierarchy now valued ingenuity alongside strength, and laughter, once considered frivolous, became a subtle but important instrument of governance. Calvin, for his part, had grown from a hapless human stumbling into a cosmic challenge into a figure of respect and curiosity. He had learned patience, the importance of observation, and the subtle power of humor in tense situations. Pip, surprisingly proud, noted that the human had achieved a level of competence that rivaled the galaxy's most seasoned operatives. The final celebration was as unorthodox as everything Calvin had done. The palace held a festival of lights and floating lanterns, where humans and aliens mingled in chaotic harmony. Calvin accidentally set off a chain of levitating desserts that drifted through the crowd, resulting in laughter, minor collisions, and an impromptu contest of aerial catching. Althira observed, her long ears twitching in amusement, realizing that the human had not only won her hand in the challenge, but had also introduced a vitality to her court that she had never anticipated. As the festival drew to a close, Calvin looked around at the transformed palace, the court laughing and moving with an energy that had been absent before, the colossal beast now patrolling its jungle with a measure of cooperation, and the Queen seated beside him, smiling in quiet pride. He realized that he had not merely survived the challenge. He had changed the galaxy in small but meaningful ways, proving that courage, wit, and a sense of humor could achieve what brute strength alone could not. Pip hovered next to him, muttering, "Well, human, it seems you've done it. You've rewritten every rule I thought existed." Calvin laughed softly. "I think we both learned something, Pip. Luck helps, but cleverness, and maybe a few mistakes, go a long way." The twin suns of Erendor set on the horizon, casting long violet and gold shadows across the crystalline palace. Calvin, once a simple human from a nowhere planet, now stood at the center of a galaxy-altering story. Not as a warrior, not as a conqueror, but as an innovator, a problem solver, and a remarkably chaotic force for good. The court, the beast, and even the Queen had all changed because of him. And for the first time, the alien world felt less like a rigid hierarchy and more like a living, breathing organism, unpredictable, vibrant, and infinitely more interesting. Calvin exhaled, looking at the stars beginning to twinkle in the twin skies above. "Well," he said to Pip, "I guess we did it. Now, does anyone have noodles?" Pip groaned audibly but couldn't help a digital chuckle. Extraordinary human,